Trump has added a lot of creative touches in redecorating the White House. A painting of Obama has been replaced with a painting of Trump's fist in the air after getting shot. Trump stuck an American flag picture of himself in between Hillary Clinton and Laura Bush. Trump's mugshot is hanging on the wall, greeting anyone who enters the Oval Office. He has the actual Declaration of Independence hanging next to his desk. And of course, there's a variety of different presidential portraits throughout the Oval Office. Problem is, there's one person who should be there, who isn't. And that man is his very first political supporter, Richard Nixon. You may have heard before, Nixon and Trump were pen pals.
It is a collection of notes from the 1980s, uncovered over the last 2 years at the Nixon Presidential Library in Yorba Linda.
We were able to find that there exist 13 letters between the two men from 1982 to 1993, and that they had a relationship. They had a real friendship.
They first hit it off at dinner at the 21 Club. It was 8 years after the Watergate scandal forced Nixon out of office. The two exchanged words of admiration. "I am proud to know you," says Trump, who praised Nixon for his handling of the Vietnam War.
30 years ago, Donald Trump was promoting his book, The Art of the Deal, when this interview apparently made quite the impression, prompting a former president to send Trump a fan letter. "Dear Donald," it says, "Mrs. Nixon told me you were great on The Donahue Show. She's an expert on politics, and she predicts that whenever you decide to run for office, you'll be a winner. Signed, warm regards, Richard Nixon."
Letter from Richard Nixon.
Written 1987.
And it was just amazing that he wrote it. He would write me letters. It was very interesting. He always wanted me to run for office.
But what about Watergate, the biggest scandal in the history of planet Earth? I can hear some of you yelling. Perhaps you should step out of the mainstream media narrative and look a little deeper to an obvious truth.
Richard Nixon was taken out by the FBI and CIA with the help of Bob Woodward to bounce the single most popular president in American history, Richard Nixon, from office before the end of his term and replace him with who? Oh, Gerald Ford, who sat on the Warren Commission.
After all Trump went through with lawfare, the fact that everything they told you about Watergate is a lie should not be a reach to anyone, least of all to Trump himself.
He was a very tough guy. They went over to tell him that you have to get out. His biggest regret, according to his daughters, and I think according to him pretty much, was that he didn't fight.
Nixon may have regretted not fighting, but back then, what could he do? There was no internet, no social media, no X to counter the ridiculous narratives of the left. People turned on their TVs, and what the newsman said was what they believed. Imagine if CNN was left unchecked without the internet today. We'd have even more brainwashed boomers running around with swastikas than we already do.
I think I would warn against the media elitist complex. Presidential power is limited by the courts, limited by the Congress. The media's power is unlimited. And some would say, but what about libel suits? Forget it. After the Supreme Court's decision in Sullivan versus New York Times a few years ago, a public figure cannot collect in a libel suit against a newspaper or television unless he can prove malice. All we can hope from them, if they're going to be responsible, is self-analysis, self-criticism. But what we see in terms of newspapers across the country is more and more places where there's only one paper. The Washington Post is the only major newspaper being printed in the most important capital in the world. I wouldn't like to leave the fate of this country to the editors of the Washington Post.
Nixon was cornered, and there was no avenue to sway public opinion back to his side. Perhaps Trump is avoiding hanging up Nixon's portrait because of the reputation that still follows Nixon around that he was a crook or emblematic of corruption. But that is a narrative that was authored and maintained by leftists. It's time to reject that, acknowledge what really happened to Richard Nixon, and readjust his place in history and put him where he belongs.